Hey, everybody, welcome to Contra Talk. My name is Richard Henry, and this is the podcast where we talk about things that matter. And we're talking about something that matters a lot today, pornography, addiction, and everything that kind of goes along with that. Something that shouldn't matter in one sense, but it does. It's kind of the elephant in the room. Guest today is Timothy Reigle. He is a husband and a father. He's a PK. He also plays in worship music at church, very talented musician. He's got a big presence online as a coach, helping men get out of this porn craziness that they find themselves in, because he was in that many years ago, and he's now been set free. And it's a really good conversation. I hope you enjoy it. He's got all his contact information at the end, so it's a little more spicy than some. Of course, there's no images or anything, but you're going to enjoy it. All right, brother. Well, Timothy Reigle, welcome to the show. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Good. Well, thanks for being here. Yeah. Why don't you just tell the audience a little bit about you? I know we've just met, just chatted a little bit offline, and I've seen quite a bit of your posts and followed a little bit just your work as a coach, helping men and the struggles with especially sex addiction, pornography, and things that are very pervasive in the culture. But just tell us a little bit more about you.
Sure. So yeah, as you say, my main focus is helping men overcome porn addiction, sex addiction, help them to defeat that in their lives, overcome it, help them to restore their families if they're married, or help them prepare for a family if they're not married, and help them to turn their lives around and become the men kind of God intended them to be in the first place. I got into it the honest way, through going through it myself, and spent about 15 years in an endless kind of cycle of porn and sex addiction that escalated into full on, it wasn't just watching porn, it was having affairs and hookups and all these sort of things as well. Wow. While being married, and going through all of that, and periods of minor success from time to time. I would go stretches without anything and do well, but I always went back to it. I could never fully overcome it. And I was doing all the right things. I'm a Christian. I was born and raised in a Christian family. I always considered myself a Christian. Certainly wasn't living it, but I was going through those and doing the quote unquote right things. I was talking to my pastor about it. I went to the seminars. I read all the books. I did the Bible studies. I did the counseling. I did everything you're supposed to do. Mm-hmm. None of it worked. And it wasn't. And I got caught a bunch of times, and BS'd my way through it. And my wife and I actually separated for a year. But ended up getting back together. And it was just kind of that cycle. Things would be good for a while, but then I'd slowly kind of ease my way back into it, and then it would get really bad, and then I'd get caught again, and then it'd kind of just keep that cycle again. And that continued for like 10 years. Wow. After we were married. And the last time was about 5 years ago. And I got caught by my two best friends at the time. And they kind of exposed me, kind of, let the secret out of the closet, if you will. And that was kind of the wake up call, I guess, if you will. Mm-hmm. In hindsight, it kind of breaks my heart that all the damage I did to my marriage and my family didn't get me to stop. It was losing my two friends that I go out for a beer with and watch the game with and that type of stuff.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, God used that to get the message through to me. And I'm glad he did, Yeah. But, so that was kind of the wake up call to me. And that's when I finally got some serious help. I worked with a mentor of mine, who wasn't formerly a coach, but now that I'm coaching, it was pretty much what he was. Mm-hmm. And he helped me deal with the real issues behind it. He understood me and loved me and cared for me and didn't just beat me over the head with the Bible or just tell me I'm a pervert or there's something wrong with me or all these different things. He didn't excuse my behavior by any stretch, but he helped me understand it and helped me realize that I wasn't just a pervert, that I wasn't just have a higher sex drive or that I was just this horrible person who couldn't control himself. He helped me realize that there were things underneath of it that were causing it, that I was using porn and sex as an escape, using it to cope with things in life, to deal with life, it's a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
And so that really changed the whole mindset for me. And that's what really helped me to get free. Cause before I had just, like I said, done all the right things. You're supposed to try harder. You're supposed to pray harder. You're supposed to, have an accountability guy. You're supposed to read all these books and do all this stuff. And it worked for a while, but I never healed from it.
Yeah.
And so he helped me heal from it. One thing I say all the time is you don't quit porn, you heal from porn addiction.
Say it again.
You don't quit porn addiction, you heal porn addiction.
Heal it.
Because there's something underneath of all of it. There's pain, there's emotional trauma, there's something that we're using porn to escape from. And that's true with any addiction. It's not just alcohol or drugs or porn or whatever. We use it to cope, to deal with. And so he helped me discover what those things were in my life, which led to lasting sobriety, but also healing and recovery and restoring my marriage. And on our 10th wedding anniversary, we renewed our wedding vows kind of as a, hey, we're starting over here, and so my marriage has been incredible ever since. I've been able to, heal the relationship with my kids. And a few years ago, kind of through church in a couple unique ways, which in hindsight was just God working, I was able to, kind of be a mentor to some younger kids, some younger men through church. And that kind of led to being a mentor to them, which kind of led to starting to write a little bit, which led to going online, social media and Twitter, which then led to then COVID hit. And that's when I started doing the online coaching. And so now I've been doing that for about 3 years and helped hundreds, I don't even know how many, to be honest, hundreds of guys through my coaching business and through that ministry to help them do the same thing I did to quit porn and heal their relationships and become the men they should be.
Yeah. There's a lot there and I want to unpack some of that. Rewind a little bit. So when did you first get exposed to pornography? Like how old were you?
Probably like 12, 13, somewhere in there. And it was one of those things where, the big three were, don't drink, don't smoke, don't have sex.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a, I didn't go over to a buddy's house and he showed me his dad's Playboys. That I hear that story a lot from guys,
Sure.
I'm 36. So I kind of grew up right on the cusp of the internet porn age. So it was kind of half and half magazine to internet stuff.
Yeah.
So it wasn't
especially if it was 12, 13, that's even,
Yeah. It was just curiosity, honestly. I was told these three big things don't you ever do. Well, when you become a hormonal angsty teenager, what do you think the three big things you want to do are?
Right.
So I did it. And then I was like, hey, this actually feels amazing. This is awesome. This is, then you start questioning everything.
Right.
And so, but I was kind of hooked from it from the instant. It was just thrilling. It was exciting. It felt good. And, I had no idea what the consequences of it were then.
Yeah.
And I just got hooked and it continued to go from there and get worse and escalate. And I never dealt with it for, another 15, 16 years.
Yeah. Wow. So I assume there was premarital sex and all that as well.
Yeah. So it's going through high school, I was in, girlfriends and relationships, sexual relationships with that. I played in bands for a long time. I'm a musician. And so I kind of lived that sex, drugs, and rock and roll lifestyle for a few years too, being a guitar player in a band and kind of just, doing that whole thing and everything that comes along with it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, and that I think that the amazing thing is, and that's one of the things I wanted to talk more about with you, and there's a few other things I want to touch on as far as this masculinity in our
Hmm.
current moment. Um, but before we get there, thinking more about pornography and how, yeah, there's blocks, yeah, there's filters, and those are very helpful.
Hmm.
Accountability partners, all that. Um, but at the end of the day, it's still like a massive elephant in the room that people
Yeah.
don't really you just don't really address. And I think most Christians, there's still, and I love those ministries, the focus on the family type ministries and the
Hmm.
American family, whatever. And they have the movies, and it's well, it's a B minus. There's a woman with her top off for a second, and there's a couple curse words, and there's a few explosions, and they're just kind of rating. I personally like movies. I like
Yeah.
movies a lot less than I used to, but I think a lot of times that all that just really falls short. I do like John Piper's point of dead people and explosions; those are fake, but the bear woman or man or whatever, that's still a real person, right? And so there's
Sure.
this distinction of like, I don't care if people are getting shot. Yeah, I probably don't need to see it, or big, sci-fi explosions or
Hmm.
something. But pornography is still this like, yeah. I mean, I heard that with like Oppenheimer, the Nolan movie. Have you heard
Hmm.
about that? And
Yeah, I
I know
haven't seen
some
it yet, but
people saw it, it was great, blah, blah, blah. And Christians, and other people, it's like, yeah, this is a waste of time. It's not even that exciting. It's not even that good. And by the way, there's all this weird sex scene stuff. You're like, this is just
hmm
really. So it's just the little stuff, the big stuff, and everything in between. And I mean, it's not just, playboy.com or whatever. I mean, it's whatever the percentages are. I mean, you probably know them better than me. It's like a third of the websites out there, or adult content, or whatever the massive number.
hmm
There's millions and millions and millions of dollars exchanged every day, or I mean, it's just crazy. And then you have all these other OnlyFans, Facebook, or it's like
right.
Twitter porn, right? And there's all this other stuff that you're like, there's just these new inventions of evil, right? Like this, just like it's everywhere. And it's something that churches by and large don't want to talk about. And as a pastor myself, I mean, I can understand to a degree why, especially from the pulpit, because half the population, especially if you're north of 50 or 60, and you never really dealt with this with your husband, or you yourself as a female never dealt with it. Not you, of course. Uh, but you know what I mean? Like women just don't get it, right? If, for lack of a better word. I
Yeah.
know some women can be addicted to it. They use it like a drug. I mean, it's really using. It is a drug, and I appreciate even you kind of saying that in that way, because it is, in one sense, it is exciting. It is this. Yes, it's not an excuse, and I don't think you're saying that either. For those listening, but women just don't get it, right? In the sense that like, well, he's a pervert. He still struggles with, oh, you look at that. I can't believe you used to, and just the stuff that the men in their lives would go through. Most
hmm
women just can't handle it.
Yeah.
That's probably a tough pill to swallow. And so you have to go to other avenues to confess that sin, or, yeah, I'm still struggling with this, or I've struggled with this since I was 9. I mean, I was exposed when I was 9. I've never had any sort of uh, adult do anything weird, abusive to me, praise God, and on any level, other than spankings that I deserved. But I know a lot of people have that, or there was like that older creepy guy that gave them porn, and then they did that stuff, or they performed this, or hey,
hmm
watch me with this prostitute, or watch this video. And that is just whole another level of just craziness. Do you find that a lot with your guys that you're coaching, that there's not just pornography, but there's a lot of abuse, sexual abuse, and things like
I
that as
I do. Yeah, I see that a lot with a lot of guys. A lot of guys have dealt with sexual abuse, physical abuse, um, you know, divorce, death in the family, major kind of red flag trauma.
well?
So I see that a lot. But just as much, I see guys who were like me that don't have any of that, that grew up in a very healthy Christian home. And what, but that doesn't mean there's necessarily not any emotional trauma.
Yeah. Hmm.
It may not be the glaring obvious things in those kind of big red flags,
Yeah.
but it's a lot more subtle in those areas. It's a lot more hidden. It's things that sometimes we might think, oh, these aren't that big a deal. We think, everybody deals with that. For example, one of the biggest things I see guys come across is rejection. They face some sort of rejection in high school or at a young age, and they learn to fear that. And so they constantly avoid anything in life that they might risk facing that rejection. And so they run to porn because there's no rejection in that. Why approach a real woman and become the type of man that can be a strong masculine man and attract a good woman and risk being rejected when you can sit there in your underwear watching porn?
Yeah.
And get sexual satisfaction that way and get all that dopamine rush and everything that goes along with it with zero chance of risk. And so that's what a lot of guys deal with. And you go back, you're looking through it and you think it from the prism of, oh, well, other guys were sexually abused and that's why he ended up, which is true and happens a lot. You think, oh, well, you got dumped by some girl in high school. Okay, who hasn't?
Right.
But it left an emotional scar on you. And oftentimes at those young age, especially those adolescent years, those teen years, when a lot of this stuff happens, we learned at that age to use porn, to use sex as a way to deal with that emotional pain, to cope as a coping mechanism. And it sticks with you throughout life. And so now when you're in your 30s, you still have that fear of rejection. It may have nothing to do with getting dumped by the girl you have a crush on. Maybe it's you're working a job and your boss rips you a new one, or your wife's nagging you about the honey-do list, or whatever. But it triggers that same emotional pain inside you that you felt when you got dumped by that girl when you were 16. And how'd you learn to deal with it then? You learned to use porn and sex to run away from it.
Yeah.
So you do the same thing when you're in your 30s. You use porn and sex to run away from it. It's just a different trigger from it, but it affects the same emotional pain. Yeah. And so healing it requires figuring out what those things are. Whether it's the big red flag trauma or it's the more subtle wounds, whatever it might be, we have to figure out what those are, what damage they did, and then how to learn and deal with them in a healthy way. And that's how we kind of find the true healing and recovery from it.
Gotcha. How long would you say then, on average, does a guy heal from he comes to you or you go to him or, you're introduced or whatever? How long does it generally take if somebody's been using, 1, 2 times, 3 times a day for years? How long does that take?
Sure. It really depends. Because guys come to me at all different areas. I deal with guys who are watching porn and masturbating 4 or 5 times a day. And I deal with guys who are maybe once or twice a month or once or twice every 2 months, but it's still a problem and it's still an addiction. Yeah. So it varies in levels like that. The biggest thing is that I focus on is progress over perfection. This isn't something that you're going to fix in a couple of weeks. My initial coaching program is 90 days. And I see guys make the major leap forward in those 90 days. Some guys completely free in those 90 days. But I focus more on, like I said, progress over perfection. Guys get hung up on the streak, on how long they go without a relapse. I don't worry about that so much. I worry more about wins versus losses. So basically, I'm worrying more about the batting average and the hitting streak. Because what happens with guys is they'll go 2-3 weeks without porn, and then they'll have a slip up. And they're like, oh, I messed everything up. I threw all my progress away. I'm starting over.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it sucks you messed up, but you went 13 days and had 13 wins in a row and you had 1 loss.
Yeah.
That's a 928 batting average. And that mindset shift is important. Yeah, we want to try for no relapses. We want to quit it, but almost nobody quits cold turkey. It just doesn't happen. Not that God can't do it, not that it doesn't happen, but that's not most guys. So it's focusing on getting those wins under your belt, getting some progress, getting some momentum. You can't You can't lose 20 pounds until you lose the first 5.
Yeah, sure.
And so guys look at this, the guys who are watching porn multiple times a day, multiple times a week, whatever, to go from that to completely free and think you're going to do that really quick or in a couple of weeks isn't going to happen. And it can be overwhelming. It's like, okay, so let's break it down here and let's focus on just getting some wins under our belt. Maybe it's not perfect, but if you're watching it 5 times a week and we cut it down to once a week, that's a win in my book.
Yeah,
it's not perfect. Yeah, it's not ideal. Yeah, it's not what we want, but it's progress. And so that mindset shift from perfection to progress is a huge thing for guys. And that when guys make that mental switch, that's when they really start seeing some success. So, it really varies. There's a lot of guys that find most of the guys I've found to directly answer your question, found success in 90 days. But it does take longer than that. There's scientific things that say your brain can take a year or more to kind of reset itself from the dopamine receptors.
And that's something that's really, well, I want to say something to continue, but I want to get back to that.
Yeah. So there's a number of different things that go into it in that way, so there's actually stopping the activity, and then there's healing the emotions that cause the activity.
Yeah.
And then there's kind of the medical scientific side of it, of kind of resetting your brain, because your brain's so used to it. And it is a drug. It's a dopamine addiction at its core.
Yeah.
So it's kind of those 3 different things that you kind of have to deal with, and they each take different lengths of time to deal with.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. I think, again, a lot of people, and I have a lot of female viewers as well. So ladies, I know y'all struggle with it, but not as much as guys.
Right.
But we're not all perverts, right? In one sense. But it's something that it is a drug, and there's this level of not doing it, and kind of that 90s into the 2000s, maybe even the 80s, purity culture, that whole thing. Don't do this, purity ring, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And it's like, yeah, I mean, but sex, God made sex, and sex is amazing, And so, my oldest is only 13, and she's very reserved, and she's a girl. So, my wife's more or less on top of all that. But, my son, he's 7. And not to say I ignore my oldest, but there's points that you don't have those conversations necessarily as much. Sure. And I can't wait to, and I already kind of pack it in, with my words, if you will, with my son, praying for his future wife, or he jokes, he's really funny, and I'm kissing my wife or something like that. Oh, are you guys being romantic? He'll say something like that, and I look forward to saying, because who knows what they really know, really. But, you talk about the birds and the bees, quote unquote. And we have there's some good Christian books out there, and they explain stuff. And we don't hide around that, because, hiding it, the boomers and the raising kids, and maybe even the generation before them, it was just this very decades, post World War II, we're like, we just can't talk about that. We don't have sex. And it's like, what is wrong with you? Like, why wouldn't you have sex? Like, enjoy your wife. I mean, Proverbs 5, rejoice in the wife of your youth. Well, if this is the wife of your youth, you got married when you were 25 or whatever, and you're 55 or 85.
Yeah.
Why aren't you rejoicing in that wife? Sex is good. It's amazing. And my point is looking forward to that, even for my son. And this is something you get to do in marriage, and it's wonderful and amazing, and it's something not to be like, don't do that, just don't do that.
Right.
Yeah, go get married if you're at 18. Why not? If you guys are both there, I mean, it's this whole lie of, well, you're too young and blah blah blah, and sure, there's maybe some reasons not to, but so often it's just the culture and the world telling us, well, don't do that. And it's like, okay, so you want me to wait around for the next 12 years till I'm 30, really got my act together. Meanwhile, I'm using and masturbating for a decade and a half or more, and I'm all twisted. I mean, that was part of my own thing, and having this twistedness. I mean, we got married in 2007. My wife and we had arguments. I came to faith actually 2009, 8, 9. So I was a kind of make believer, but more or less it was like, well, you're not as hot as the porn stars, without me saying that, and she's never been overweight at all, and she's very cute and petite body and everything, but she's still not a porn star, and obviously that's great. And that probably sounds weird saying it, but at the end of the day, my mind was so twisted and the dopamine and the junk and the channels. And we see this now with TED Talks. And I often will say, science is behind the Bible always. It's always so late to the game. If you really look at it, you're like, well, this is why God said this 3,000 years ago. This is why he said
Yeah,
this
right.
in the first century. This is why he says, Paul's talking about the temple prostitution, that you're bought with a price. You're not your own. You're one with flesh with a prostitute, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Why King Solomon and David before him, and so many other things. It's like, to kind of hide or, be bashful about sex. I understand it in one way, but go have sex with your wife, go have sex with your husband, like rejoice in that. Don't let the enemy have a foothold. And yet so often either women will use that even in marriage, as a maybe as a ploy or as one up. And that's a whole other probably conversation. But it's, I think a lot of times even in the church we have it backward, and even how to deal with it. And so just don't do it. And it's like, okay. I mean, there's certain stuff it's easy not to do, but there's other stuff, as a 15-year-old boy or even a 12-year-old boy, 9-year-old boy, it's just like, this is exciting though, and this is interesting, and wait, what? And just trying to deal with those things. It's a whole nother ball game. So yeah. I mean, yeah, that's all what I was going to say. The TED Talk stuff too. And you're kind of relaying to that to a degree. I mean, there's so many TED Talks over the years with that about porn and how bad it is, and this and this and this and this. And again, that's what the scripture says, right? Like it's all over, right? So
yeah.
Anyway, talk about the process, like post healing. So a guy, how long have you been doing it? You've been doing it like 5 years or so now, something like that.
I've been coaching a little over 3 years. I've been clean a little over 5 years.
Okay. And so would you say then, so say a guy goes through the 90 days and, day 85, he's like, I'm free. I think I really, God's used this and changed this and this. And say, so keep it easy. That's, the end of March, for example.
Sure.
We'll say like August, he uses.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is there like you're back, kind of like alcoholism, or like, how does that work? Is there like a setup that you suggest? Hey, talk to your wife, keep a short leash on your sin type of thing, put blockers on your phone, on your computer.
Yeah. It's not a going back to square one. It's a setback, certainly, but it's not starting all over. If you travel 100 miles and you blow a tire, yeah, it sucks. You're frustrated, you're annoyed, but it doesn't start you back to mile zero.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
You fix the tire, you get back on the road, and you learn to avoid the potholes the next time. And so that's how I look at it when there's a relapse like that. Okay, well, let's figure out what went wrong here. Because if they've had 6 months of success, there were some safeguards in place there. And not just practical safeguards, there were emotional safeguards there to avoid triggers, to avoid those things that would set off the emotional side of it. So somewhere along the line there, something failed.
Gotcha.
Either he started letting his guard down a little bit and it eventually snowballed, or, sometimes things pop up and sneak up on you. It's we have an enemy and he likes to do that. Yeah. So
no, it's true.
And especially when he sees you start turning your life around and fixing things in your life and living for the Lord and living righteously and being a good husband and father, yeah, he's going to throw you some curveballs. So those type of things happen. So it's figuring out and retracing our steps and looking back and be like, okay, what happened here? This something happened that we should have had guardrails and boundaries and things in place for it not to happen. So something failed along those lines. So figure out what it is, look back over it, kind of retrace your steps, figure out what that is, what you could have done different, and then how you can be better prepared for the next time.
Yeah. That's good. I'll ask you one more question about it, and then I want to kind of switch gears a little bit and
Sure.
talk about kind of masculinity in the culture and the church. What why does the church, in your opinion, your experience, obviously before coaching and even now,
Mhm.
why does the church not talk about these things? What's your thought on that?
I think it's a symptom of a bigger problem in the church. It's the church is unwilling in a lot of areas to talk about difficult subjects.
Hmm.
And there really isn't anything more taboo in our culture than sex. Especially when we live in a society that is so hypersexualized.
Hmm.
The church feels like it has to go completely the other way. And that's where all the purity culture and all that sort of stuff came from, which wasn't bad, but it kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater. And it was just, again, like we talked about at the beginning, it was just all these rules and it didn't explain why. That it is just don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And it caused probably more rebellion and people to do that out of that, like it did with me, than it did. It was shaming kids into purity.
Mm.
And we need to teach them purity and why God wants that for them. And sex is actually a good thing and why it's important for them to wait for it. But people don't want to, you're working with volunteers who don't want to sit there with a bunch of 13-year-olds and talk about that.
Hmm.
But we need to. Pastors don't want to talk about sex from the pulpit, don't want to talk about, like you say, Proverbs Proverbs 5, Song of Solomon,
Yeah.
1 Corinthians, I think it's 7, 1 Corinthians 7, where it talks about coming together
Hmm.
and sexual relations in marriage, because those aren't the fun topics ironically, they aren't the sexy topics to talk about,
Yeah.
you
Which is
know,
weird. Yeah.
and,
I
people
know.
want to come to church, and the church has evolved into this where they want to come to church to feel better about themselves.
Mm.
They want to go leaving encouraged and leaving um, with a motivational speech, which in some ways church should do that.
Hmm.
But that's not the purpose of church. The purpose of church is to come together and worship God and to study his word and to preach his word.
Yeah.
And
No
we
doubt.
should come away feeling convicted as much as we are feeling motivated. And the church as a whole, not that there aren't people doing this, the modern 21st century evangelical church is focusing more on this watered down, safe message because it puts butts in seats.
Hmm.
It puts money in the offering plate. It makes the pastor sound good on Instagram. But it's, the whole word talks about these tough issues.
Yeah.
It talks about sex. It talks about addiction. It talks about all these painful things. And we need to be preaching all of that. And because of that, these topics get overlooked and they don't want to be dealt with. And even in the more intimate things like the men's groups and the things like that, they don't go that deep. They're just so shallow all the time.
Hmm.
And I've dealt with this and seen this. We have these men's breakfasts and stuff like that, which are good. I mean, I'm glad we do those things, but they're very shallow. They never get into talking about where men sit down and talk about the struggles in their life. You might have some dude up front who gives some motivational speech and just selling a book, and then that's it. I found in those things, in those events, and I've gone to all kinds of men's retreats and stuff throughout my life. I gained more from those things when it was just you and a bunch of guys sitting around a fire
Hmm.
and talking and sharing your heart than I ever did sitting in some conference room with some motivational speaker. And so we've gotten away from that realness of place for men to come together and grow and share their struggles, share their hurts, share their wins if they have them, and older men to mentor younger men.
Hmm.
That's not happening. we're coming together for these feel good things. We're coming together because we're supposed to, and we're supposed to go to church on Sunday. We're supposed to do these men's groups, and you're supposed to do the men's breakfast, and you do all this stuff, and you do all this stuff, but it's all shallow crap. And you never really get into the weeds and the real struggles that guys are dealing with, like porn, like sex, like booze, and obesity is one that's huge in the church that completely gets overlooked,
Yeah,
even
don't
more
talk
so
about that.
than porn and sex
I
does.
think so too.
We
Especially in the Midwest and
overlook
South.
all those things because we don't want to go to those tough areas and have those tough conversations, because a lot of men don't want to have those tough conversations.
Yeah.
But we need to. And it's up to churches and it's up to pastors to be leading the way in that. And it's not happening. And so that's why porn's getting overlooked. These addictions are getting overlooked, and it's not getting dealt with. And we're seeing the consequences of it.
Yeah. Wow. That was good. Well, related to that, I'd like to wrap up kind of just your thoughts on culture, men. Of course, toxic masculinity. You hear masculinity, it's automatically toxic, right?
Right.
And we see that. I mean, of course, I'm being facetious, but we see that it's time and time again, right? And there's alternative media out there and alternative social media and this and this and this, but still, these conglomerate, these massive multi-billion-dollar companies still churn out stuff, right?
Sure.
These people, these famous people, Disney and this and that, and CNN, blah blah blah, and of course, big education and all these other things that just they're 95+% all leftist, right? And the current thing is, bash men, destroy men, etc. But then there's other within the culture, and I found this fascinating, and maybe you can shed some light on it. We have, I don't know 5 years ago now, a Jordan Peterson rise up, and it says, piss off, in his Canadian, very winsome Canadian. Oh, how dare you? My mom made my bed, whatever. And I love the guy. But like Jordan Peterson, we got the Joe Rogan, we've got Andrew Tate, we've got, of course, Tucker Carlson, and there's, of course, Trump, right? And many of these guys, and none of these guys are Christians, right? None of these guys are really confessing Christ. They might say they're a Christian or some flavor therein, but
exactly, yeah.
You ask them and they're really not. And hopefully they'll turn to Christ, right? Jordan Peterson seems close. You have the Ben Shapiro's and the Matt Walsh's. I know Matt Walsh is Roman Catholic, and I don't really know where that all is, and whatever. But like, there are almost no pastors or theologians, men like you. You're not a pastor, but you are a coach, and you're a man who dealt with real stuff, and you want to help real men deal with real stuff and have a thriving marriage that's honoring to Christ and proclaiming that truth to the world. Why is it, and maybe we kind of already answered this, but why do men in the church still gravitate to these guys outside the church? And those who are in the church, that's one part. So why do we gravitate toward them? Because I appreciate it. I mean, I'm not saying you can't appreciate it, but there's that, and then there's this absence. There's a lot of guys, and we saw 2020, 2021 BLM stuff, close your church, and these famous pastors, they're kneeling in solidarity. It's like, David Platt, Matt Chandler, what the crap are you guys doing? What is wrong with you fools? Like, why are you all of a sudden now? You used to be this young, restless reform guy. What happened? Like, I'm wrestling. I mean, have you thought about this question? Like, it's bothered me for a couple of years now, and I don't really bring it up just because I don't know. What is that making sense?
Absolutely. Guys look up to those, I call them masculinity gurus.
Yeah.
Because there aren't guys like that in the church. Now, in some ways, that's a good thing. But because some of these guys morally aren't
like
what they should be and living according to the Bible. But the difference is these guys are appealing to what men are looking for.
Yeah.
Men are looking for masculine role models. They're looking for guys with balls.
Yeah.
That's what you see. And say what you want about Trump. The guy's got some stones, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of these other guys, they live by their principles. They're aggressive. They're assertive. They're stand for something. They don't bow when the pressure gets hard. They don't bend when the government wants to come and tell them what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're living out inherent masculine virtues. And men are attracted to that, and they see that, and they want that. They want guys that are strong physically, mentally. They want guys that are adventurous. I love the John Eldridge quote that every man needs a battle to fight, an adventure to live, and a beauty to rescue. And those guys are doing that. Now, they're not all moral guys. Trump obviously isn't a moral guy. Jordan Peterson has some incredible wisdom. He's not a Christian, and I don't agree with everything, but he's got some great wisdom. Even Andrew Tate is a completely immoral person and very decadent, but he makes some sense on a lot of things.
Yeah.
I heard somebody explain it very well. Andrew Tate understands the problem, but his solutions are off the wall.
Yeah.
And I completely agree with that. And so guys are seeing, he's a little bit of an extreme, but guys are seeing these masculinity gurus and they're seeing like, hey, I want to be like that guy. There's no one in the church, or very few guys in the church, where you can walk into and be like, hey, I want to be like that guy.
Yeah.
If you walk into most churches this Sunday morning, try to look around and see a guy and be like, hey, I want to be like that guy. There might be aspects of his life that you want to be like. You might find a guy that's a brilliant biblical mind, and you can sit there and talk theology with him day and night. But he's 300 pounds and his wife wears the pants. You don't want to be like that guy.
Yeah.
Guys that are all around strong men in body and mind and spirit. Walk into your church and try to find 5 guys that can drop and do 20 push-ups without having a heart attack. Probably can't. And so guys are seeing that, they're seeking that, and they're seeing these guys that are bucking the trends, the feminist trend that's happening in culture, and in turn is invading the churches. They're seeing that, and they're looking for guys who are fighting against that. Well, the guys that are fighting against that, unfortunately, a lot of them aren't in the church. So that's why they're drawn to the Rogans, to the Tates, to the David Goggins, to the Jordan Petersons, and all these guys.
Yeah.
We need guys like that in the church, guys like that who are living biblically and having biblical morals. They don't need a harem like Andrew Tate. They need to have a wife that they love and that they're having sex with and unashamed about it.
Yeah.
Guys that are leading their homes, that are teaching their children, that are physically in shape, that are mentally strong, that are studying their Bible every day. Guys that are all around living the type of masculinity that's spelled out for us in the Bible.
Yeah.
And they aren't seeing that in the who's coming, which is the women. And it's getting weaker and weaker and weaker. So you see these guys that didn't have any stones when it came to standing up against COVID, and probably won't when it inevitably will happen again. So that's what we need. We need strong Christian role models in the church. We need pastors to step up and be that example. We need older men to step up and be that example. And it's just not happening. And that's why we're seeing either men just give up and just throw in the towel, or they're looking elsewhere for that guidance.
Yeah. Last question related to that. Why aren't men? I mean, I went to seminary. I knew a lot of great guys, a lot of smart guys, knew their Bibles well. I went to a healthy church beforehand for several years. And so a healthy, good church. And so there was just a lot of stuff I already kind of knew. Might sound arrogant, but seminary still helped me to kind of plunge into diving deeper and gave me that desire to read and dig and all that more than just, a lot of the stuff I learned in seminary that I do now, or I don't use what I learned. Not that it's irrelevant, but I think a lot of it, like even a high school education or even college, really prepares you and like plans for you and makes you go do the stuff. You're only learning so many things, and then you go, all right, this is how you go read. This is how you go learn and study and so on. But a lot of the guys, yeah, I mean, I know there's alpha and beta males, and there's a lot of stuff out there for other, like sigma males and whatever else.
Mm-hmm.
But so many times, I hate to say it, and I wouldn't I'm not gonna name any names for sure, but I got some friends that are they're just beta males, and
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I'm an alpha male. I would say I'm more, based on some of the things I've read in the past, I guess sigma, where it's kind of, do my own thing and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not trying to puff myself up at all. But like, I know the alpha males, they ask Andrew Tate, like, this is what it is, deal with it, piss off,
Right.
like that type of thing. It's like, that's not me. But at the same time, there's just a lot of things that I see that are just, it's sad. And anyway, my question, why don't we do that? I mean, especially when we have a wife and kids. I mean, again, in your experience, like, I mean, they tried to cancel the guys we've just mentioned, right?
Mm-hmm.
This guy and that guy and these other people, and it doesn't phase them. And yet these other guys they try and cancel, Christian guys, and they get canceled, and they're like, I mean, I wasn't. I'm really sorry. Here's I got this, and they get all flustered, and you're like,
Mm-hmm.
bro, you just preached. You said that homosexuality was a sin. You said adultery was a sin. You said abortion was a sin. Is it not now? Like, did you
Yeah.
forget? Did God's word change? Well, winsomeness. That's the thing that a lot of
Mm-hmm.
guys, and I'm in a couple offline chats, and a lot of the guys in there I think are good, but I think, based is the thing. Oh, is he based? Are they based? And
Yeah.
I feel like it's way overplayed. I don't ever use the word honestly because I think it's a little cheesy. But why? Why don't men do this, Tim?
I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier, where we're not preaching the word, the whole word, and nothing but the word.
Mm.
If pastors were truly preaching the word, they might preach those things and say these things are sinful and rightfully call out sin in our culture. But if they're not standing firm on that, then they aren't really living out the word.
Mm-hmm.
1 Corinthians tells us to stand firm in the faith, to act like men, to be strong. And that's what we need to be. And men aren't doing that because what that requires is self-ownership. It requires accepting responsibility. It requires recognizing that, hey, this all starts and ends with me. If my kids are not behaving the way I want them to behave, or not living the lifestyle that I want them to live, well, that falls on you as a father. That means you didn't teach them the right way. It's not that they're just little Gen Z, little, buttheads. It's because you didn't teach them. If your marriage is failing and you don't have the sex life that you want to have with your wife, and you only get pity sex on your birthday and Valentine's Day, well, that's your fault because you're not leading her. You're not the type of man that she wants to have sex with regularly. A man who's living out his life and is the true head of his family, leading his wife, leading his kids, keeping himself in shape. The wife won't be able to keep her hands off of him. You won't have that problem. If you won't accept the responsibility that the problems in your life are your fault, then you're not going to accept responsibility in all these other areas. So it all starts and ends with us and accepting that responsibility. We're responsible for our lives. We're responsible for our sin. And when the Bible convicts us, we should be convicted. We're not calling out sin in these churches for the most part. It's well, just, try to do the right thing, or, Christ loves you no matter what. He'll forgive you, which is true. But he also tells the woman caught in adultery, go and sin no more. He calls the Pharisees to repentance. He calls the disciples to repentance.
Mm.
And we're not seeing that first of all, we're not seeing the call out to sin. Second of all, we're not seeing the call to repentance. And it's just this love everybody, come as you are type of thing, which Christ is loving. He's accepting, obviously. But sometimes showing love means calling somebody out for their sin. Sometimes, to be blunt, sometimes love looks like being like kind of like an asshole and telling somebody what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. And men are afraid to do that. But that's what Christ did. Christ was this loving, accepting figure. But he wasn't just this hippie that just, whatever, man, he called people out. He flipped those tables in the temple courts. He chased the dude around with a whip. He called out those Pharisees. He was aggressive. He used what now would be considered profanity. He called them broods of vipers. That would basically be the equivalent of what we would call vulgarities now. He was aggressive. He was strong physically, mentally. And that side of Jesus isn't being isn't being taught. Sorry.
It sounded good for a split second. I was like, I don't think that's the right word. That's all right. I get what you mean.
But it's just this soft, effeminate Jesus is being taught.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And so men aren't attracted to that. They don't see anything in that for them. We go to church and we listen to these, I call them Jesus is my boyfriend songs. And so there's nothing there for men. So the men aren't there. So they aren't being called to the responsibilities that they should have. They aren't dealing with the tough issues. The tough issues aren't being taught. The whole Bible isn't being preached. And so all those things come together to form this perfect storm. And that's what we're seeing. Mm-hmm. We're seeing weak men in a weak church, in a weak culture. And because when that happens, sin prevails. And that's what we're seeing happen in a church. And until men stand up and become the men that they need to be, and the husbands and the fathers and the leaders that they need to be, we're going to continue to see that.
Yeah. Man, it's so true. I mean, it's one of those, like, it if you're paying attention, it, and it's like, but it can't be. But is it? And then you hear it, with someone who's very experienced and says it like it is.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, you're right. That's very helpful, brother. It really is. Where can people find you? I know we met on Twitter. What's your Twitter handle and website and all that? If somebody maybe wants help, reaches out to you, they can consult, talk to you.
Sure. Yeah, the best place to find me is social media, Twitter and Instagram. My handle is the same on both, Timothy Reigle. Or my website's timothyreigle.com. You can find out more about me and my coaching and what I do there, and my writings and my own podcast and blogs and all the things that I've done are all available there. My DMs are always open. Don't hesitate to reach out. That's the hardest thing a lot of times, is saying, hey, I need help, and taking that first step. And that's the first step to finding freedom from addiction. And then once you find freedom from addiction, you can heal your relationships, and you can become the type of Christian, godly man that, like I just talked about, that, I talk about 1 Corinthians 16 all the time, is stand firm in the faith, act like men, and be strong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's good, brother. Well, I enjoyed this a lot. Thanks again for taking the time. And
Absolutely.
yeah, everybody check out his work there. Easy is your name right there on the screen. So Instagram, Twitter, or as we call it, Elon calls it now, X.
Yes.
It's like he's got an infatuation with the letter X, I guess. But
I guess
anyway, It's been a pleasure, brother. I appreciate it. Everybody take care and God bless. Have a good day.
Thank you.